Well, yesterday went about as I expected. I was worried yesterday that there was going to be unrest and people protesting the 4th of July and sort of the same sort of unrest that we've seen over the past few weeks, but with a focus on American independence being a bad thing, or at least some sort of a dismissive attitude. And the left did not disappoint, and not just the far left, the mainstream left, meaning like the news media, the corporate media, the Washington Post, all sorts of publications were putting out these think pieces, and I just abhor so-called think pieces because they usually don't think very deeply at all. But the one in the Washington Post that I saw specifically was talking about how the legacy of 4th of July, that's a very bad thing. So what do you celebrate when you celebrate 4th of July? Well, you're celebrating racism, for one thing, of course, and all these other things that were bad. And they traced all of these bad things and said these were all caused by American independence. So the 4th of July is a really bad day. We should not be celebrating it. And so this is literally where we are. If last year you had said that in 2020, the 4th of July would have become a partisan issue, I think that people would have thought that you were insane, at least the average person. But now here we are, and we're literally at the point. I said yesterday that our two-party system is now split into a party that nominally likes America and a party that doesn't like America. And I'm not saying this to shill for the GOP. I still don't like the GOP. My problems with them remain. It's just so funny to watch how the Dems now, I guess this has to be a lot more than just Orange Man, because you don't go from saying Orange Man bad just straight to America is bad. All of it has to go. So this is a much deeper, more long-term problem that the Dems are suffering from here. And again, I feel the need to say that this is specifically a Democrat thing and not just a far left thing, because mainstream media is pushing this line that the 4th of July is a bad thing. The DNC tweeted that Trump planning to have some sort of 4th of July celebration at Mount Rushmore was promoting white supremacy or something to that effect. There were countless folks yesterday just going on and on about how Mount Rushmore's ugly and they need to give it back to the Lakota, and all these things that were radical fringe ideas just a couple of years ago that nobody in the mainstream would have ever entertained. But the logic there is it's quite telling, because if they want to give back Mount Rushmore to the Lakota tribe, who lived there, of course, before the American pioneers settled that area and drove the Indians out, which part of westward expansion, that whole part of history. Well, then by that logic, the whole of the country needs to be quote unquote given back, even though much of the United States was unoccupied because of the nature of most of the society of Indian tribes. A lot of them were nomadic, and so they didn't have large sustained populations. They kind of wandered around. So there was the U.S., or what is now the U.S., was by today's standards very sparsely populated. But anyway, leaving that aside, the logical conclusion of what people are saying about Mount Rushmore is that everyone needs to get out of America. Anyone who's not a Native American. And so this is about much more than just saying Black Lives Matter, because of course that would mean the black people too. You can't have the black people lording over the Native Americans. Now, of course, all of this is totally unrealistic. It could never happen. You have nowhere to send all of the Americans. There's 320 million Americans. You can't just, it's not like Zimbabwe, where there were, hundreds of thousands, in the hundreds of thousands of white people in Zimbabwe, and Mugabe decided we need to get rid of them. You guys need to go, and so they just kicked them out because there weren't that many of them, and a lot of them, I guess, were offered citizenship by the UK because they had nowhere else to go. So the UK said, "Well, we'll take you in." and a lot of them went to Australia and America and were able to find homes. And so, it was doable to kick the white people out of Zimbabwe and say, okay, we're just going to go back to having everything be indigenous. And of course, the indigenous people in Africa, are black folks. But it wouldn't be realistic for, the Native Americans, who are like 0.2% of the population, to say to everyone else, yeah, you guys got to leave and go back, to wherever they consider our home to be. So there's no point in saying any of this. This is just sort of an expression of distaste for the United States, and for not just the government of the United States, but for the all of the people who live here, and everything everything that America means. It is sort of a way of pissing on all of our history, all of our culture, everything that's associated with American society. So I have to say, the sort of the building blocks of, the Spanish Civil War certainly seem to be present here, at least in the left. The left is acting exactly like the left did in Spain back in the 30s. They're destroying things, they're burning down buildings, they're tearing down statues, they're, of course, defacing depictions of Catholic saints. They're talking about how the nation is evil, and that something needs to replace it. All of our culture is bad. This is very, very similar language to the revolutionaries in Spain. And of course, we know how that ended, with a 40-year-long military dictatorship. Or, well, not really a military dictatorship to be precise, but it was a dictatorship led by a general. Because eventually things got too out of hand, and the military said, you know what, the government can't handle this, we're stepping in. Now, I don't think that could happen in the United States, because we don't have that same tradition that they do in Spain. In Spain, there was a tradition, kind of like in Turkey, of the military intervening when the government could not handle things in their view. The military was sort of a last resort, or a pressure release valve, a check valve, on things getting too out of control in Spain. But here in the U.S., our military has always been completely subordinated to the civilian government, for the most part, except for, the military-industrial complex, of course, is not. But that's a little different. That's not so much the military itself. Those aren't the generals. The generals join the military-industrial complex after they get out. But I don't think that when it comes to truly domestic affairs, the military does not involve itself. The military is concerned with being able to perpetuate forever war to, enrich themselves and their friends. Essentially, the military brass are a bunch of grifters, and nothing more. So they don't really take up a role in domestic politics in America. So I don't see how we could have a situation like Spain, to where, we have all of this civil unrest and things, and buildings burning, and people deciding that, hey, America's been around long enough, we need to tear down America, you have all these revolutionaries. I don't see the U.S. military stepping in to put that down. But it's clear that you cannot sustain a country where half of the population or so thinks that it should not exist. Now that these ideas are being mainstreamed, they're going to take off like wildfire, just like all of this intersectionality stuff. Just a couple of years ago, nobody was particularly concerned about trannies and whatever crap they have to deal with in their life, and, getting snipped and all that stuff. But the left was able to catapult that to sort of the forefront of political debate. And so now I think they'll be able to do the same thing when it comes to questioning the legitimacy of the United States. And in doing so, by questioning the legitimacy of your government, you actually delegitimize it, because it opens up the idea that the government may not be legitimate. And to me, this is, from my perspective, this is a pretty good thing, because obviously there's a lot that I don't like about particularly the federal government. They have lots of, tyrannical things that they do that are not good. And so I don't think that that's legitimate at all. But, these folks want to go much further than I do. They want to not just overthrow the government, not just, reduce the government. They want to overthrow all of society and replace it with something new. And these people are becoming much more mainstream. I mean, we're almost to the point to where the resistance crowd will not celebrate the 4th of July. And again, we're not there yet because these ideas are not being openly they're not being openly touted as dogma by the mainstream media, but the idea that America shouldn't exist is being people are being desensitized to it. It's considered to be a reasonable position by the mainstream media. But pretty soon, just like with all of these ideas, once they're sort of laundered through the media and mainstream to a certain degree, they become dogma, something that nobody's allowed to question. That's what we got with gay marriage and with the tranny stuff and with all of this racial nonsense. I mean, it's very hard logically to describe why you should tear down a statue of Christopher Columbus and then it's very hard to argue that America should exist and that Christopher Columbus was a very bad person and that there's nothing that we should remember positive about him, that he did nothing good and he doesn't deserve to have all these statues of him everywhere. Obviously, the implication is that if Christopher Columbus, shouldn't have statues of him, that his legacy is bad. And what is the legacy of Christopher Columbus? Well, it's all these people coming from Europe to the New World. That is the legacy of Christopher Columbus. He is the father of Latin America, and he's the father of Anglo-America. Although more directly Latin America, since he was working on behalf of the Spanish crown. But if you are a member of one of these societies and you like your society, you have to pay some homage to Christopher Columbus. He is the reason we're all here. So if you don't do that, well then obviously you don't think that we should all be here. You think that our very existence as a society is abhorrent. And so when I was seeing all these folks in the media talk about how Trump's speech was divisive, he didn't unify the country. First of all, that's just such a disingenuous statement because nobody would ever expect Trump to unify the country, and if he tried, nobody would give him any credit for trying. So that's just it's a completely BS standard. But beyond that, you cannot unify people who don't think America should exist with people who think America should exist. There's no unifying those two positions. It's totally binary. I've got a lot of problems with the U.S. government. I'd be happy to see the U.S. government go and see something else replace it. Namely a bunch of smaller countries, I think would be much better than having this one big United States. But with that said, I don't hate America. I don't hate our civilization and our culture and all these things. But perhaps the left doesn't know how to revolt against specific things. To them, if they're mad, then everything is bad. They are, sort of mindless zombies that just want to go about destroying things. So we're past the point of no return at this point, as I see it. I don't see how things de-escalate from here. It's a matter of how long will it take for things to finally be pushed to a breaking point. What will be the straw that breaks the camel's back? What will be the trigger of the final collapse? My bets are still on, the economic crisis, which is still unfolding, and that is going to hit in full stride once the Fed loses control. I don't think that it's unreasonable to say right now that the Fed is the last pillar holding up what's left of the United States, and I don't say that proudly. I don't say that like it's a good thing. I think what the Fed's doing is obviously disgusting, but ironically, they are what I think is preventing the society from completely collapsing in on itself at this point. But of course, because of the Fed's actions in the past, they cannot save us this time. The Fed has set us up for a very, very bad collapse over a very long period, and they are desperately trying to kick the can down the road. And so as soon as, as that's over, as soon as they fail, we're done. There will be no way to have any sort of consensus in America to rebuild after the destruction that is coming. It will be seen as a great opportunity by both sides, or multiple sides, to distance themselves from one another. And so we are opposed for hopefully a Soviet-style collapse. I do not want to see any sort of Yugoslav-style collapse, or worse yet, the worst possible scenario would be a Spanish-style civil war where two dumb sides are fighting and there's no good guy, and eventually one of them takes over the entire country and imposes a government on all Americans that at least half of them don't want. So hopefully we are able to reach some kind of a Soviet solution. And by that, of course, I mean a peaceful separation, a peaceful partitioning. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.